course, he liked to do what he's doing, but at the same time, when it comes time that he might be win it, he don't want to go in there and carry on what you have to do in terms of being the president. And so that's what I mean when I talk about a psychological, and maybe you might be able to provide some information in reference to individuals, those kind of case studies that you have in reference to from that perspective. You see, not necessarily to say that he ought not to be the president, etc. But you know, I think that's what we're trying to do, because it's such an unusual thing. I know my wife has said a lot about it. You know,
is that right?
Yeah. It's hard. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. CPoe, and he's giving us some information in reference to a psychological interpretation of the election of 2016. And so, Dr. Poe, let's give you an opportunity to continue our conversation.
Right. I want to follow up on a question that you raised during the break, which is, does Mr. Trump really want to assume the office of President of the United States? And my thought is that there's a possibility that he really does not want the responsibility. At the same time, I think he does enjoy being in the spotlight. I think he does enjoy perhaps the challenge of becoming president, but whether or not he really wants the responsibility, I think is a very legitimate question. Now, I think there is evidence in my thinking that Mr. Trump has a significant self-esteem problem. As a matter of fact, I saw something by a psychologist just a couple of days ago that indicates that Mr. Trump may have a problem of malignant narcissism. Now, narcissism is essentially me loving myself more than anyone else. That's narcissism. As a matter of fact, it's based on a story of a prince by the name of Narcissus. And Narcissus looked into a lake and fell in love with his image and tried to embrace his image and drown. And so the outcome of narcissism we know is negative. In any event, I think that people who love themselves more than is healthy or more than anyone else, okay, I think that those persons have an inner problem of self-loathing, or have an inner problem of self-disgust, or have an inner problem of intensely not being pleased with themselves. Now, anybody, and another way of saying that is, if I have if I love myself too much, then I've got really a problem of self-hate in one degree or the other, okay? And people who don't like themselves, or who loathe themselves, who have negative image of themselves, these people consciously as well as unconsciously are going to sabotage and do things that will hold them back. And so I think that's consistent with your question about whether Mr. Trump really wants to be president. Okay? And so given the very likelihood that he does have a significant self-esteem problem and may be suffering to some extent from narcissism or loving himself more than he should, that I think sets him up to be self-destructive, whether he intends to be or not. And I think another evidence of a person who is self-destructive is that most people who are self-destructive are determined to have their own way, okay? Which is another way of saying if a person is self-destructive because they're struggling with self-hate, they are not going to be willing to listen to anybody. They're not going to be willing to acknowledge that another person has a better idea than they have. They're going to be insistent on having their own way. As a matter of fact, As you may know, I've been working in corrections for the last 3 years at a jail in a community not too far from here. And there's a high prevalence of persons who are incarcerated, who are in jail or in prisons, who have this problem of narcissism, who have this problem of being determined to have their own way. And of course, you can see that if I'm determined to have my own way, I'm going to run afoul of the law. I'm going to end up doing something that's going to get me into trouble. And it seems as if that Mr. Trump is constantly doing things, saying things that gets him into difficulty. And so your point is well taken. The question is well taken. Does he really want to become president?
I think
so I think consistent with the fact that persons who have a problem of low or very low self-esteem, they're going to sabotage their own future. They're going to do things that are going to get them into trouble.
You know, and to think that you talk about low self-esteem, you think that a person who has had the accomplishments, the buildings and all of that, I guess that means absolutely nothing, no matter how much money you have or what kind of situation you might be in. If you've got a mental attitude that indicates that you're going to have your own way, then it really doesn't matter how much money you have or how wealthy you are. Is that what we're saying?
Right. In other words, no amount of money can cause me to genuinely feel good about myself. No amount of good looks is going to cause me to genuinely feel good about myself. No amount of fame, no amount of power or influence over other people is going to cause me to genuinely feel good about myself. And so I believe that Mr. Trump, in all due respect,